Well, first of all, I just want to share that I'm so grateful that Heather asked me to give this talk because I really needed to be convicted in this area. And so it was amazing to just learn more about and to think more deeply about poverty, simplicity, and generosity. And as I was praying and thinking and researching for this little sharing, what I was really led to was not so much what I typically think of with poverty, simplicity, but really about God's abundance for us. So that's a lot of what I'm going to share about, because that's just where I was led. So I'm going to talk a little bit from the perspective of this book by Thomas Dubé, Happy Are You Poor, which is an extremely convicting book. It's pretty radical, but I think there's some really good principles and very convicting notes that he makes. So I'm even going to read a little bit from that, and then I want to talk about some of the saints of our community and how they experienced God's abundance through their lives of simplicity and weakness. And it's actually really amazing what you shared, Sam, because it's right in the vein of, vulnerability and weakness leading to like God's abundance in your life. So there's no real guidebook for, I kept going back and forth of like poverty and simplicity, like you must kind of cut things away and then you can come into God's abundance. Or do we experience God's abundance and so we cut things away? Like, I just kept going back and forth of like, what's the answer here? And I guess what I came to was, it's both. Like, as we get to know the Lord and how just incredibly rich, and it's the only place where life is. Like, those other things just dim. They're like duller in comparison. And so it's easier to continue. It's like the more we choose him and the more we cut things away, the easier it is to choose him and not choose those other things, and vice versa. So, I loved during Heather's sharing when she was talking about this topic, she mentioned the quote from C.S. Lewis about how we're content to play with mud pies in a slum when the Lord has the seashore, like the infinite, ocean of life. And that quote has always done something to my heart. I'm like, yes, that's it. Like, that's what I actually want. And like, how can I possibly be satisfied with the trivialities of just some of the things that I'm satisfied with at times? Mm-hmm. And I was brought to the scripture of the Samaritan woman when she meets Jesus at the well, and he calls her in her just utter, I would call it an utter like poverty of formation and what like her experience up to that point of God. She hadn't met him, and so she was like the poorest of the poor in that moment, and how the Lord came in to her desire for water and for something earthly, like to satisfy her thirst. And it just never gets old. Like this encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman, where he offers her true life, and which is himself in that moment. So in this book, Thomas Dubé talks a bit about readiness for the kingdom, and I think he is of the mentality that you you gotta shed all the other stuff in order to receive God. I think that is his philosophy from what I've read in this book. Which I just don't know. I still think it's a both and. But I love this part where he talks about readiness for receiving the Lord. Yeah, one is, so he talks about the concept of readiness. And he gives this example of two 5-year-old kids who, one of them has a readiness for learning how to read and one of them doesn't. And the first one's readiness to learn reading is a nothing in the sense that right now they can't read. Yet it's something that he has a maturity sufficient to enable him to absorb instruction when it's given to him. And then later he talks about the saints and how they're disposed to receive the love of God. And the more that they have this disposition of emptiness, the more that they're able to receive the abundance of God. So it's very connected with humility, like this mindset of turning from the worldly things to the heavenly things of God. Like we have to shed certain things that the world offers us and that are just natural to our life. So I've been reflecting a lot on Psalm 23 and how God lays a feast before us in the sight of our enemies. And so I was thinking about what are the enemies to this feast that God has, that he sets before us. So I was reflecting a little bit on that, and hold on. Not sure. My screen just went blank, hold on. Oh no. Very much has batteries. Okay, it's doing things, that's good.
It's the enemy to the feast.
It's definitely an enemy, technology. Oh my goodness, it really, really went away. Okay, hold on. Oh, good. It came back. Am I going to need to connect to the internet here? Okay. Yeah, so just these values of the world that they're so sneaky and they come up and it's immediate gratification. Like, I can't wait. I can't be patient. Having a consumer mentality, like I have to, I don't know, sometimes I just feel like compulsively buying things or filling myself with these things. And competition with other people, like just so in the back of our minds, like, oh, I want what they have, or, oh, that's the newest thing, so kind of want to have it. And you convince yourself that it's not an impulse buy because you've wanted it for a very long time. Versus humility, being last, being unknown, being hidden, And I think especially the virtues that like are so not desirable in the like culture that we live in today. Like I would argue that generosity is, you know, people are like, wow, you're so generous. That's amazing. You know, amazing that you gave everything away. People would like applaud that. But being like a child is not cool. Being obedient, being chaste, I think are especially like things that the world just looks down upon. So there's this quote about humility that I'm going to read from Dubé. And he says, "Poverty has a great deal to do with humility. We human beings tend to equate our life of to be with our level of to have. The more we possess, the more we are in our own mind. Or the more we possess, the more we are in our own minds. The man with a large estate, several cars, a sizable portfolio, just assumes that he is superior to the slum dweller. The woman who is seldom seen in the same dress is sure that she ranks higher in human society than the dowdy wife whose family is on welfare. Perhaps the chief reason prestige is so immensely important to many people is that the impression they make on others dictates their own value. And an abundance of material things, in their opinion, enhances their prestige. People who by choice embrace a frugal lifestyle assess themselves far more realistically than those who do not. They are free from subjection to the minds of others. They know their intrinsic worth before God and do not feel a need for the shoddy props afforded by mere things. Being innerly uncluttered, they are ready for the divine invasion. It easily happens. And I think about like those times when in prayer or in life when we are just we're not in spiritual consolation, we're desolate. And we're not like completely unable to come out of those. Like there is a way out, and it is this like readiness for the Lord because we've looked away from worldly things. So there's a great freedom in it. And who does this? The saints. The saints do this. Like they are examples of something happens and they see a greater reality. And like I was saying earlier, like everything else just pales in comparison. So I have a few examples of these saints, or holy people who aren't yet saints. So first, I was reading about Pierre and some of his words. Thank you, Sam, for loaning me this book. And I was reading this story of when they moved they moved from having a meeting where like they were at a place that was dedicated to Mary Magdalene, and then they moved to where Saint Margaret Mary had her visions of Jesus's Sacred Heart. And Pierre said, so Mary Magdalene is thought to be the woman who washed Jesus's feet. And he says, to be at the feet of Jesus is good, but to be on his heart is better. And I was thinking about that quote and about God's abundance. Like that simplicity or poverty, it doesn't mean that we are destitute. It doesn't mean, like, it's the opposite of that. Like that's what the world thinks when they see simplicity, poverty, giving up worldly things. Like, oh, you're have nothing, you know, you're so poor. But like, what we mean in the Catholic sense is that there's like room for so much abundance. And I just saw this like Pierre knew that God had his heart for the Emmanuel community. And he's like, yes, we could be like slaves, servitude at Jesus's feet, but why not rest on his heart? Like just so beautiful. And then he talks there's this part in this book where they're talking about, many people are asking him about his encounter with the Holy Spirit. And they're like making all these comments about like that he kind of felt it was coming, or that he's been praying for years that this would happen. They said, it surprised you, but you were feeling that something was going to happen in your life. And Pierre said, no, it was a grace of Pentecost that fell on us. If one had told the apostles 3 weeks before, you're going to receive, they would have said, right, well, we don't really know, or we don't understand. And they said, but you had your past behind you, all your experiences of the church and your life, like you had all of these things. And he says, that wasn't any use to me at all for all the graces that the Lord was giving. And Pierre attempted an explanation, which, with modesty as always, you understand that the Lord always gives things bit by bit. You're making progress, and bang, it blinds your eyes, and it's so much more powerful. That's all you remember. And it was, from what I understand, this experience of the Holy Spirit in Pierre's life. Of course, he was leading a life of prayer, but I think it just shows, to me, this story showed forth like God's abundance again. Like he had been, it came out of nowhere. Like God's gifts just like come upon us. And sometimes there's not a whole lot we can do but receive. So Pierre's talking about like all of the richness, or they're talking about all the richness of his past, but he's like, no, that was really nothing. It was just a moment where God came upon, and he calls it a fresh zeal. And then there's another point when that kind of highlights the same thing, where he's talking about you've probably all heard of this, but like the race between the two, like Therese of Lisieux. He was like, oh, you know, she died at 24, so I have 5 years to catch up with her. And then he moves on, you know, after he realizes that he says, so I ran the race against the clock with Therese of the child Jesus. You can understand that I got myself well and truly beaten at the starting post. On the other hand, I was out of breath. I was really very out of breath because I had gone too fast. That's obvious. So then he tries with Teresa of Avila and said, oh, she took 20 years, so I could do that. And then he realized I had taken 40 years and I still hadn't made any progress. And then at that moment when I said, I'll never manage to do it, boom, things started to get going. So you have every chance. The most important thing is really to wait until the Lord calls you. And so, I don't know, I guess coupled with this idea of simplicity, poverty, detachment from worldly things, and yes, like we do have some skin in the game. Like we have to do things, and there's freedom there, and there's abundance there. But also, God is God. He's like King, He's all sovereign. He comes into our life, and even when he was trying really hard, he was like out of breath, as he puts it, like trying to be holy and trying to like exemplify the little way of Saint Therese. Like even then, he knew he couldn't do it. Like God had to come in and call him in this moment. So then I was reading about Cyprien and Daphrose, and I have never really learned anything about these two and was so amazed by them. It struck me of their weakness and poverty at the beginning of their relationship, especially Cyprien. Well, Daphrose too. I mean, so maybe you've all heard this story, but so Cyprien was kind of a famous man in Uganda, and very well known, was engaged to be married to another woman, but she died tragically, was assassinated. And so to honor his commitment to her, he married her cousin, Daphrose. And did not love Daphrose at the beginning of their relationship, and was adulterous, and he had kind of written the Lord off when he was in seminary because of some intellectual ideas about the faith. And so they have such a poverty at the beginning of their relationship. Like, he is not even faithful to his wife, let alone, like, are they good, normal church-going Christians? But I think there's something to that. Like, it was out of that poverty in their marriage that made them such a powerhouse in the future, where it then talked about how so after Cyprien's conversion, after he had an illness and was miraculously healed and had this coming to his senses moment, and went back to Daphrose, they began just with such fervor to chase after the Lord and each other, and to be so united. It was like they were more united than they ever could have been, almost, if that poverty hadn't happened in the beginning. And then it says, more and more households in difficulty are confiding in them. Their home becomes a spiritual hospital from which many couples emerge transformed. When divorce is very much frowned upon, they also receive single parents and accompany them, always with a concern for charity and truth. Poor people and the ministers come into their house and all meet together to prepare the meal and pray. So it's like, it's just beautiful how the Lord worked in their life to transform the poverty of their relationship and use it, like, oh, blessed fault, kind of, is how I was reading it, and then to bless so many couples who are in difficulty. And Cyprien said this after his conversion: if you don't want to be carried away by the waves, you have to dive in and swim deep. If you don't want to be dragged down by hatred, you have to dive into prayer, deep into the heart of Jesus. And so he's talking, it's kind of the same thing that everyone's saying, the same thing that Thomas Dubé is saying, like, you don't want to get carried away by these waves. Like, in the moment, maybe you're kind of like unaware of it, but the waves of the world, the waves of our culture, like, no, we want to dive deep into prayer, intimacy with Jesus Christ, and that is what the Emmanuel community proposes, is adoration, and adoration as the fundamental pillar of our community, which is just an acknowledgement of the reality that God is everything, and He's the only way to life. So then I realize this is very brief. It's kind of it's too hard to, there's just like these little moments that I can go into. I can't go into like the depths of their spirituality, but so then St. Margaret Mary. I didn't know really much about her story either, so I'll just share briefly. But she made a vow of virginity, and when she was in her youth, kind of. But then her mother suggested that she really wanted her to get married, and so she thought, well, it's not such a bad idea, actually. I kind of would like to do that. And so she got swept away in kind of social pressures, and then she, after kind of a night out or whatever, I don't know exactly what happened, but she received a vision of Jesus scourged and suffering, and of his heart crying out that he was so little loved, and she felt personally like she had loved him so little. So then it talks about the source that I was reading. It says, spurred by this vision, she recommitted her life to Jesus and entered the visitation order at the age of 22. The sisters of the visitation order were meant not to be extraordinary except by being ordinary. But eventually this would not be the case for Margaret. She was referred to by her sisters as humble, simple, and frank, but above all, kind and patient, under sharp criticism and correction. The quiet sister was by no means a perfect nun. Her spirituality was one of simplicity, which made it hard for her to meditate and pray in the way the other sisters did. She was clumsy and slow due to her past health issues, which made everyday chores difficult. To an outside observer, Margaret would have seemed very ordinary. But we know that the Lord chose her, this like not perfect sister, not a perfect nun, simple faith, she didn't, I was thinking even about her, maybe her simplicity of prayer, like she didn't have these maybe these like practices that were very complex and extravagant, but she just had this simple relationship with Jesus. And she was clumsy and slow in the way that she did things. And somehow the Lord always chooses the smallest, the weakest, the smallest clan of the weakest tribe of, and in the end, her last words before she died were, "I need nothing but God, and to lose myself in the heart of Jesus." So there's kind of a thread that go through all of these people is, Cyprien and Pierre moving to the heart, the Sacred Heart, and Cyprien saying that, talking about the Lord's heart, that where this abundance comes from. Yeah, Cyprien, you have to dive into prayer deep into the heart of Jesus. And now Margaret Mary, all she needs is to lose herself in the heart of Jesus. And so it's kind of an abstract idea, but how do we enter into the heart of Jesus and to this heart of simplicity and actually be completely overtaken, to dive deeply into his heart? And I really do think it's adoration. So I guess that's one practical thing, which is something that we already do. And for me too, the examine of just asking myself, how is the Lord in my life right now? How is he coming into my life? How is the heart of Jesus impacting my life? And how am I responding to that? I was really inspired by a retreat recently to pray the examen every day. And I'm often inspired to pray the examen every day. And then I end up, not doing it or falling off. But I really do think it's such a roadmap of awareness of where are we at in this journey of am I taken by the waves of the world and the culture, and am I given over to what the world is telling me to do? Am I filling myself? Am I engorging myself with the things of this world? Or am I in a place of freedom? Am I free to rest on Jesus's heart? Am I free to enter into the depths of his heart? If I had time, I was just gonna share my own little experience with simplicity and with my embracing my own poverty. So I think I have a couple minutes, I'll just share. So probably the most poignant example that I have of